Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? We only have 45 minutes, so we need to start right on time. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed lunch. There it is. So a warm welcome to this panel session called Open Science Meets Open Education. I will give a brief introduction, and then Vanessa Proudman will give a presentation, a short one, and then we will be having the panel discussion with the 4 participants listed here. So when we talk about open science or open scholarship, subcategories have been formed like open access, open data, open software, open hardware, and also open education. The library community has been working on open access and open science advocacy, policy and implementation over the last 10 to 15 years or so. And open access has become a very practical challenge since much of the work is now in its implementation, having large implications for academic outreach. In parallel, open education in Europe is gaining momentum as well, but it seems as though it does not share the same playing field as open access or open or fair data. Where open science or open scholarship may have clear lessons to teach open education to spur it on faster. The main question of this panel today is whether those 2 playing fields should be treated separately or even becoming part of an open program. And there seems to be more to be explored as to how to make meaningful practical links between open access, open science, scholarship and open education to help stimulate further developments in particular areas or to help solve common challenges more rapidly. So without further ado, because we are very limited in time and we want to have a discussion also with you, so I want to invite Vanessa to give a short presentation on the open agenda. Before we start, maybe one question to start with. So who has taken a leadership role in open education at their institute or organization? Can I see some hands? Or no? Could be. Okay, 1, 2, 3, so. Okay, that sets the temperature. Vanessa, can I invite you to, and I think you need that one, or you can use this one, I think.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm actually thrilled to see that there are so many of you. I was actually telling everybody, I'm not so sure that many people will come because we've got sponsor sessions, we're right in the middle of Dublin, but it's great to see you here and that showing an interest in open education. And I'm going to very briefly, you're used to long presentations from me, but very briefly I'm going to frame this. We want to dedicate most of the time to the panel, but I really see libraries as natural partners in open education. Very much based on our experiences and competencies in making open access and open research happen. So let me tell you why. So firstly, open education is part of advancing the open agenda in general. As Jeroen just mentioned, many of us have been working for many years on enabling open access to research publications, to research data, now educational resources increasingly, also promoting and using open standards and open software. And it's really about providing access, more visibility to our institutional assets, contributing to development goals, and also really increasing the visibility of our institutions also through education and increasing the quality of not just research but education through opening up that to our educational communities and to society in general. So it's actually about making a more open university. A lot of us are very focused on supporting research, but we know we have students who we are supporting, providing access to information. Here we can enable access to educational material, and it goes back to, I can't even read it myself, the Wheeler Declaration, I don't know whether you can read the small URL there, but he declared that we need to work on an more open university and looking at a number of these aspects. So I'm challenging you to think about how open are you as a university. I know you're contributing, most of you, to open access and open research, but what about education? I think it's a real natural step and a bridge to make between open science and open education. So let me tell you very briefly about the context of education or open education in Europe at the moment. So briefly, as I said, the open agenda is increasingly becoming the norm. There's so much policy out there. The current LIBER conference is filled with practice, so this is becoming increasingly accepted by the research community, that there is more access, and through that, our institutions are becoming more visible. And so part of that open agenda is not a new thing to then approach and think about open education. You need to link that then to the work that you're already doing to benefit your community and society at large. There's also, so apart from a big discussion about how we measure and increase the impact of our own research in our institutions, what about the impact of education, increasing the quality of our education, and how can open education contribute to that? How do we ensure quality? How do we measure the impact of education? And also the return on investment. So we make those arguments also with open access and open research, also transparency, but also what's the return on investment, and how can open education contribute also to those arguments and contribute to increasing quality in education in our institutions. Another challenge that we have in education is that our teachers, our students, but teachers are increasingly mobile, moving around Europe. What happens when they create excellent teaching resources? Can we reuse them? Who has licensed them so that our institutions can use those gold nuggets in the future? A lot of the time, I think we forget about that, and they take those resources with them, or we're unsure whether we can reuse them. So we need to think about, can we take a responsible role to make sure that that material can be shared and reused? Furthermore, we also need to recognize, and there are in some countries real focus on the assets of our institutions. So it's not just the publications or research data or our output, but it's also about the educational resources. It's also an asset, right? Who owns that data? Again, just linking to what I just said, how can you license that so that it can be reused? And I mentioned, I think, very quickly, there's an increasing interest in sustaining development goals, and to increase the quality of education is one of those. So that's how open education can feed into that. And of course, we're also all interested in economizing, being more efficient, saving costs, and looking at different business models, also for open education and our textbooks. So why are our libraries natural partners? I think many of you will probably recognize some of these things, but it means that we can also take action. I'm just kind of reminding you. So we're often seen as a trusted partner in our institution. We're highly service-oriented, facilitate access to knowledge, so here with education. And our rules are changing from just being buyers of information. We're being creators, curators, publishers, legal advisors, and knowledge disseminators. We've been providing a lot of leadership in open science over the years, and some of us are already providing e-learning support, particularly if IT and library services are joined. And we are increasingly working together with other departments across our institutions. And I'm talking about partnership here. I'm not, and as we saw, we only saw 5 hands go up who's taking leadership of open education. It's really in partnership with faculty, with pedagogues, etc., and where libraries have something to say and contribute. And how they are responsible for, sorry, just distracted. We are very skilled at collection management, information discovery. How can we make visible, findable open education resources? We have repositories in place for research data for open access, but also for educational resources. Need to think about that. The distance is not too far from what we're already doing, is what I'm saying. Copyright and open licensing is a pain point across the board for open access research data about ownership, but we have experience in that. We also have experience and are putting effort in challenging current business models, publishing ones at that. And that's what we need to think about also for open education. Advocacy, we've been very good. Well, there have been a lot of efforts to change practice, publishing practice, research data sharing through our advocacy efforts. So why not use those skills also to advocate for open education? And we are, of course, advocating through information and research literacy trainings. So it's a no-brainer to link to the work that we're doing there and also telling people about open educational resources, even if they're not stored in the library, but enabling and empowering educators to make that material open. And we're also, some of us have maker spaces, so co-creation with pedagogues, with teachers, students to create new materials is another opportunity. I'm not sure whether you can see this. So I did this a little while ago. You can see open access publications, research data, and open education. There are a number of challenges here, and we can discuss how many crosses. We're not going to do that now, but you can see that across the board, there are a number of areas where we already have experience, which I've already mentioned, but looking at also, which I haven't mentioned, sustainability. How do we sustain our efforts in these areas? That's what we can think about. And of course, the challenges are perhaps the same, but the approaches are slightly different. Obviously, for open education, you're also not talking to researchers as such, although some of those researchers are obviously teachers and have valuable material to make open. But there you can see that there are a number of common areas, so the step's not too far. So I kind of want to end on what we don't yet know, though, is which academic higher education libraries in Europe are offering open educational services. We saw a few hands. I want to know more about which libraries and academic institutions have developed an open education policy, and some of you in the room I know already have, and we have somebody on the panel. What good practice collaborations are there going on between libraries and other departments to enable more open education? And what good synergies are there between open science and open education? How is that really being facilitated or encouraged? So I would really like to know more about that. So I think I'm going to end on, so we have, since a year, Spark Europe's been coordinating a network of European open education librarians. It's quite small. We want to expand on it, and we share our progress at, probably once every 2 months. We're developing a strategy for that group, and then we want to look at a common project of what we could do in the future. But what I really need next is to survey, so just going back to what we don't know enough about. I can't go back, unfortunately. Anyway, so to find out about how far things are embedded in the libraries for open education, to carry out a survey, and then we can build on that, build on those gaps, look at the synergies, and take things forward. So I think that's my frame, and now it's over to the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa, for this presentation. May I invite the panelists to the tables? We have on the far right side of me, Dan van Loon, subject librarian, humanities and education and e-learning at Utrecht University Library. We have Ignacy Labastida, working as head of the Office for Knowledge Dissemination at the University of Barcelona. We have Kirsti Lingstad, head of the Digital Library at the University of Edinburgh. And his hometown, we have Timothy Savage, professor of technology and learning in higher education at Trinity College Dublin. We have half an hour for a discussion. I'm moderating. I will look to the audience, and if you have questions, we can take questions because we have this beautiful blue, what's it called? Catch box. So please, if you have any questions, raise your hand, and we will try to fit it into the discussion. So to fire off with question, considering the developments in open science and the challenges in making education open, who do you need to consider implementing open education successfully, and to do what? Who wants to start with his or her thoughts on this?
Ladies first.
Thank you very much. So, apparently ladies first. Yes, I think within Edinburgh University, we're very lucky. Our university very early on developed an open education resources policy, and that's allowed us to very much work with our colleagues in learning and teaching to develop things together. So it was very much the learning and teaching team who drove that forward. And then over the years, we've kind of started working together. I think thinking very much around about open access and copyright. So both the library provide advice on copyright, the learning and teaching team provide advice on copyright to the teaching teams. So we've worked together and kind of developed in partnership sometimes, and sometimes separately, different kind of elements and strands that are kind of working very well together. The library is increasingly developing and digitizing content that we then make sure is available, and we highlight that to the OER team to make sure that they promote that to the academics to use within the development of open educational resources. And that's then also fed into our work round about Wikimedia. We've got a Wikimedian in residence who works very much on the learning and teaching side, and in partnership, again, we've digitized content that can be used, and Ewan very much works with academics, so we've embedded Wikimedia, which has got some core digital literacy and literacy skills that students need these days. So we've now had some 600 students go through and develop Wikimedia resources with some 400 staff trained and some sort of 250 plus outputs. And again, from the library's point of view, the sort of resources we've put into Wikimedia, some of our images, in total, I think we've had 28 million views of the images we've put in. So I think we firmly believe that making things openly accessible benefits many people, from our academics using the library and the library collections in a really different way. It helps educate around about digital literacy with our students. So we're using it sometimes quite organically, but also sometimes in partnership, and sometimes we sort of spin off and do our kind of own pieces of work, but then come back together to collaborate. But I think benefiting very much from having that policy and that very strong emphasis on open and open access, open educational resources. So I think I'll hand over to someone else.
I'll take this here. Thank you very much for the invite for being here, and I'm the only person in the room not from a library background, so forgive me if I say anything wrong or misleading.
Or
rude. And I've never been amongst so many library people in a confined space as well, so it's a little bit intimidating. I suppose from my perspective, when we're answering the question of who has to be involved in this, obviously the libraries have a crucial role. However, if we're talking about the use of open educational resources that are created, reused, remixed, and repurposed, we're talking about enhancing the quality of the learning experience for the students. And to do that, you need an academic change in practice. So there's a whole raft of other elements I see around this integration issue. So you certainly need the library for the curation, the collection, the management, the copyright, and the IP is huge. But you need a blended learning strategy. You need interaction with the teaching and learning, the pedagogy units, to explain how to integrate in a meaningful way educational resources into the teaching and learning. You need to avoid the traditional issues academics have where they just, excuse me, where they just add in extra resources, adding in extra workload on the students. Instead, if they put this in, what do they take out? So there's a whole pedagogy piece surrounding this as well. And obviously, motivation and incentives and reward. Yeah. So for me, it's really focusing on those kind of elements as well.
So we started that in Barcelona more than 15 years ago. I'm a physicist, I'm not a librarian, even now I'm working in the library. But we started in our, what we used to call the teaching improvement unit that was not in the library. And our idea was, if those resources are good enough for our students, should be good enough for everyone. And we were designing this course on optics made in Java. And we thought, what? We want to share that. And if it's good for our students, it will be good for everyone. And that's why we started with open education. And initially, I was not in the library. We thought the library is a good partner. So we wanted to start some kind of portal with publications, with this unit that was belonging to the Vice-Rectorate of Teaching, Academic, and with the library. Unfortunately, that moment, the library wasn't really ready for that. And they skipped the offer. And they said, no, do it yourself with publications, take DOIs and things like that. But then, I could say around 2006, 2007, the library realized that they should bring more services. And that's why we become this CRI, this Center for Resources for Learning and Research. And the library said, well, that's a role that we want to play together with the Vice-Rector of Academic. And that's the way we are now. We started our repository, in fact, with educational resources, not with research. And we moved from open education to open access, open research. And I think, and I'm really happy to see again the Wheeler Declaration, that as a university, we should have an open agenda. It doesn't make sense to be open just for research or for science. You must be open in anything. And we are even asking our institution to release data, not research data, institutional data, reports, a lot of information that we have, and we can open anyway. I mean, I'm always against this idea of open educational resources has to be high quality. I always say, well, and what about the other resources? Are you not doing good quality resources to my students? So I think the easiest thing is start opening the resources you have, as we do with the publication. So, and I think that from the library perspective, we are a good partner to go together with the academic, not just the lecturers and the professors, we also the top of the institution.
Yeah, I think I agree with what pretty much all of you said. In Utrecht, the situation is that the library has a lot of collaboration already with open science communities, with researchers on publishing open access. And just during the last couple of years, we've been finding those partners in education as well. So connecting to the Education, Innovation and Technology program that's in Utrecht. And together, we've been able to combine the knowledge of the library in opening up knowledge and knowledge about metadata and intellectual property and how a repository works. And we've been able to combine that with the pedagogical side and education innovation. And I think the question that Jeroen asked earlier about the leadership role, I think for libraries, it is very important to see where those partners are at your university. If you have a education IT support that is part of a library, then you might already have everything in-house to have a leadership role. But often the case, the education side is separate from the research library. You need to find those places where you can collaborate. And that's in Utrecht, that's been happening over the last couple of years. So we're pretty young when it comes to open educational resources. But you can see the effects of this collaboration immediately.
So Ignacio, I wanted to ask you, because you have been working in this field for a long period, and you as well. So did this leadership role, how does it work in Spain? Are you still one of the few, or Is it growing? How is your...
I could say that for a while, I remember the times of the open courseware. Spain's supposed to be like a leader. Because if you were checking how many open courseware were in the world, the US with the MIT leading were the top. And the second was Spain. And you could check this data, and I was surprised. And the problem was that there was this organization that behind we have a bank that is called Universia, was really fostering the opening of open courseware, but without a clear institutional strategy. So it was just smoke. There was nothing behind, except for a few cases. I have to mention that there are some institutions that are still there. But the problem is that sometimes you follow a trend without a clear institutional strategy. And that's why I think that it's important to do that. So there is still some universities that work together, the academic units, so especially from the vice rectors, together with the libraries. In our case in Barcelona, mainly we do it in the library because the library has also the duty now of helping in the virtual campus. Not technical, I mean, we are together, working together with the IT people, but in any problem we have on just uploading materials, and we don't have any policy for open education, but we have like a virtual policy. If you want to put any material in the repository, we still keep these collections for educational resources. Everything has to be under a CC license.
You offer instruments to actually do it. But
and as a library, we do a lot of training, as many of you, I guess. All our materials has a CC license. And I think that's another good example. I think we reached that level that we don't ask ourselves, we must put the CC license. It comes by default. So I'm happy that you, just sketching, you don't, the initial, without any, you have the license there.
The CCBY attribution license. In Edinburgh, you have a very close relation with the technical, the IT department and the library, right? Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yes, and I think for us, I mean, I would concur, it's very much working in partnership, and I think learning and teaching very much took the lead within the university on open education resources and was a kind of key driver and sort of set up the team and sort of started developing resources, working with the academics. And then I think the library kind of began to see, oh, actually, we have things we can offer. We've got, you know, our collections and various other things, and we then started working in partnership much more. And then again, with the Wikimedian and residents, that partnership then sort of further developed. But it was very much learning and teaching, working with the academics, and looking at the pedagogy, because I think that's very important, and that is a change. And I suppose it depends very much where your learning and teaching teams sit within. Sometimes they sit within libraries and then have a much closer role, and there's sort of more collaboration. But for us, we're in a converged library and information services group, and that's how we sort of come together and worked. And again, we have quite a lot of technology drivers as we sort of changed systems. That's helped drive things forward as well. So in Edinburgh, we've just implemented lecture capture across the campus. And again, that's been a huge driver for our academics and teaching staff to start engaging with open educational resources again, because they've suddenly gone, oh, what am I using? And if I'm recorded, how's that all going to work? And again, huge advice and training on copyright and those, open resources, pointing to where you can get them and how they can kind of implement. So that's again been a huge driver in implementing open educational resources and has been a real sort of swing and impetus for us recently.
Any responses from the other?
Yes, just something that's been coming up for me. Excuse me. Obviously, the structure is important, is that connection between the library and IT. There isn't so much in our institution, and also where is the teaching and learning unit. Yeah. But thinking specifically about the role of the library, I would see it both driving at the top level strategy, where you're looking at implementing a cultural change through a strategic leadership, whilst at the same time trying to support the bottom-up work of the individual academic that wants to start integrating open educational resources into their teaching and learning. And there they need help in finding them, certainly need help in the copyright, the curation, but also in the creation and sharing. A lot of academics put a lot of time and effort into creating their resources, and they're a little bit shy about sharing. They're fearsome of being judged. Oh, what if I've made a mistake? What if somebody thinks my video isn't very good? They are fearsome, certainly, of if I leave, are they just going to reuse my content? So it's a case of working from both the top and the bottom, I would suggest, at the same time. And this, funnily enough, is something I got out of a very good seminar I went to in Utrecht, so shout out to Utrecht there, from your School of Governance there, that was showing that it's the combination of the bottom up followed by the top down is the way to achieve this kind of nirvana of cultural change. So if you can really leverage the points that were on Vanessa's slides about advocacy, about getting in there and driving it and bringing the impetus you have from open science. Everyone's talking open science and open access at the moment. Well, perhaps you can slide in open education when no one's looking and try and change the culture that way.
You make a very interesting point. You said, what happens if I leave? Somebody's going to reuse. That's a point. I don't know if any institution has think about that. Who owns those materials? And I think it's a question that we should keep in mind. So probably if we were more had an open system of an ecology system of openness, probably we don't think, I mean, everything should be open.
If I may on this, I did have one case. I set up the online education initiative in Trinity. And we were doing very high quality videos and learning resources, postgraduate level, master's courses globally. And an academic left. And they required or requested that we take down their module, excuse me, and recreate the content. Cost of approximately 50 to 80,000 euros. Technically, we owned the content. Morally, I'm not even going there. But pragmatically, we agreed to take it down to ensure goodwill. So when we talk about copyright and licensing, there's the legalistic, the moralistic, and the pragmatic that I think need to be considered. We didn't give enough consideration to that circumstance when we set up the initiative, and we put in circumstances afterwards to make sure that everyone was aware that even if they left, this content would then be reused.
Yeah. And that's important also when you put a license. So here we have a very open license, CCBY, but when you put non-commercial or non-derivative, has to be clear who can lift that, who can authorize commercial uses of derivative works. So it's important as an institution to have this idea clear. I have a case in Spain with the Ministry of Education that set up a repository of open educational resources. The materials were coming from the school teachers. And a publisher came and said, I want to use it commercially. And the ministry said, well, it's non-commercial. That's why I'm asking, said the publisher. And they couldn't realize who was the one who could grant this commercial use. And it was a pity because the publisher was really interested of reusing that. Yeah. So that's important when we use the license to think about who is the copyright owner. And can.
If you talk about making policy as an institution, you need to have this question really clear. In Utrecht, the university has made it clear that all educational resources are owned by the university. It says so somewhere in a policy paper. But in communication to the lecturers and to the teachers, it's not communicated that often. As if the university doesn't want to have the problem of having these teachers saying, well, it should be mine, and having these arguments. But then you see those cases that Tim mentioned, where you come to this point where a teacher or lecturer wants to take their resources with them, and then you enter this, the pragmatic versus the theoretical aspect. And I think if you want to be clear on what kind of licenses you would like to have on your open material, then you also need to be very clear on where the ownership lies. And that's something that can be improved. And I think the library can also play a role in indicating this to the institution. Like, you need to make sure that this ownership is properly put somewhere.
And the session is called Open Science Meets Open Education. What can we learn from the open science experiences in that sense? If we talk about ownership, copyright, and I know it's a difficult question, but...
Well, I think the same problem applies there as well. You see that academic output also encounters the same problem. So who's the owner of the article that I produce, and who's the owner of the research data that I produce? So I think collaborating on that point is very convenient because the issues are the same. I think legally you can make a stronger point for educational resources that it belongs to the institution than for academic output, but that's a whole different discussion.
Let's not go there.
It has always surprised me when a researcher is really worried of, I have to reuse that table, that figure, and it's copyrightable by a publisher or whatever. But on the other hand, in many cases, many lecturers don't care about reusing other materials in teaching materials. So it's curious also from the point of view of the institution that the same person has different concerns about copyright when it's in open research and when it's in open education. Yeah. So I think we have to send the same message and to make a lot of training and literacy on this issue. And I always say that there are a lot of exceptions for research and for education in the law, but until now, we are a lot of countries here, and we don't have an harmonization on that. So things that can be done in Utrecht or in the Trinity or even in Edinburgh, maybe I cannot do it in Barcelona. And that's something that is challenging. For instance, I have to say here, we are 3 universities that will work together in one of these educational networks that was just granted yesterday. Well, what will happen with our materials or our exceptions? They are not harmonized. So probably the best solution to skip this complexity of copyright is to open everything, research and education.
I want to take the opportunity to open up the floor. Does anyone have a question? Open the floor. No hands?
There.
Oh, sorry. Oh, there. Yeah. And I need to throw this. Because I really want to sort of throw this ball. Where is it? Up. Right.
Well, that was a good start. This arises from the Barcelona comment. Do you envisage that any or some of this material, when it is all open, would be for sale to a publisher?
What?
Would,
for sale or publishing?
Yes.
I always say that, at least for education, I always will leave the freedom to our lecturers to use the license they want. I mean, if they put CCBY, as our fantastic sketcher is using, I can sell that without asking him. And this has to be clear, because sometimes, for instance, Plan S, we talk about CCBY. Oh, we want to keep copyright the authors. Okay, but we have to understand the CC license. CCBYs allow anyone, any of you, to take pictures of that and sell it just around the corner. If we clarify that, we explain that, well, all my materials are CCBY. If you want to sell it, sell it. I'm happy with that. But you have to explain that to your lecturers and your researchers, because if not, we'll have cases like the one you mentioned and other worse cases. So for me, publishing, you can publish anyway. I mean, you can publish in the repository, in educational portals. There are some best strategies than an institutional repository to put your materials online. But if you use a CCBY, anyone can sell it.
Yeah.
Hello, András Hol, Hungarian Academy of Sciences. I would like to ask you about the archiving of open educational material. Will this material be around and in 20 years or so?
I think perhaps
done.
In Utrecht, the case we have a repository. We use Figshare as a repository for open educational resources. And it's also with that goal in mind, so the archiving and the continued access to these open educational resources. So every open educational resource that is published there it gets a persistent identifier, and there are some guarantees that it will remain online and available. That also immediately adds a threshold to sharing educational resources. So we notice that our lecturers and our teachers are sometimes a bit hesitant to open it up because it gets this persistent identifier and it's treated as a publication type. But it is something to think about, to have, to retain access, but also to think about what to do with versioning. Because educational resources are, per excellence, material that you add on, that you improve over time. So educational resources from 10 years ago might not be as valid as, for example, an academic article of 10 years ago. So there are some things to think about when you talk about archiving educational resources. And I think versioning is one of those.
Is Figshare offering versioning?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
We also link in Barcelona, in the repository, the different versions. So you can, if some teacher has a new version, a presentation, lecture notes, whatever, we try to link. We always say, well, we already have this handle, and we want to keep that handle and to have all the history. And when we were using the OpenCourseware was one of the portals to share the materials, but we were making copies, preservation copies in the repository, so you could go both sides.
And I suppose Edinburgh has taken a very different approach. We've very much kind of gone, well, where are users going to be and where are they going to be looking for these resources? So we actually put things out into TES, which is a Times educational portal for teachers. So we put content into there. We put content into Flickr, into YouTube, and a whole kind of host of different places, Sketchfab for some of our kind of 3D models. Obviously, kind of content from the library sits within a sort of repository as well. And then Media Hopper is a kind of university repository, which is openly accessible as well. And that does have some sort of archiving capacity, but not kind of hugely long term. And again, we sort of keep an eye on versioning. But we're very much focusing on where will our users be for these open education resources? Where might they be looking? And we're trying to serve that content to them.
Okay, we have time for one or two more questions, and I see 2 hands. So, if the blue box can be thrown to here. Whoa! Yeah, it really works. It really works. Yeah.
Practice.
I was wondering if all these librarians are working on open science, what do we have to do to get more people involved in open education, get more colleagues, librarians involved in open education?
Well, I think that within the Library of Utrecht, we also have quite a large number of colleagues working on open science and a growing number of colleagues working on open education. And what we see is that the knowledge that we use is pretty much the same. So we have the same knowledge base. And even in communication with our researchers, at the university level, a lot of our researchers are also lecturers and vice versa. So it's not 2 different worlds. It's 2 different worlds when we say they are 2 different worlds. So Jeroen and I cooperate quite a lot, and Jeroen is very open access minded, and I'm very open educational minded. But we see the common areas, and when we talk to researchers, you can often discuss all of these topics in one conversation because it's all part of their academic practice. So I think that's a starting point of seeing open education not as an added feature, but more as another way to express open.
Yeah, so integrated in the entire discourse. There was one more question there, over there. Oh. Very good throw, Hilde.
Good catch. Ed Fair, University of Southampton. I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit about how you assess the impact of open education. So in the early days of MOOCs, it seemed there were thousands of learners who maybe didn't complete the courses. Increasingly, universities write their business plans around student recruitment. So how does open education balance against that within an institution?
An excellent question for Tim, I think.
How long have you got?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. No. I think, okay, a 2-minute brain dump. Firstly, don't conflate open education with open educational resources. Yep. Open education is an educational philosophy that everyone should have access to educational opportunities without necessarily going through the bars that we currently have in the formal education system. MOOCs I put firmly in the open education sphere. In fact, a lot of the content in MOOCs never finds its way to OER formats. And as for the low uptake of MOOCs, well, I always equate MOOCs to if you go into a library. You might pick up half a dozen things, but you walk out with 1 book. Well, with a MOOC, there's no cost to registering. So people register for multiple, but only complete 1. So I think there's there. In terms of measuring impact of OER, I think it's an excellent question. It was something that I sort of shuddered when I saw it on Vanessa's slides, as in, good luck with that one. I think one of the issues you have is so much of teaching practice goes on behind closed doors. And the metrics, it's that old thing about sometimes what counts can't be counted, and what can be counted doesn't count. If you're looking at download rates from repositories as a quasi-metric for enhancing teaching quality using open educational resources, you've got a gulf to cross. So I think really what you have to do is you have to actually look at what are the educators actually doing within their educational context to enhance their teaching and learning, either using educational resources that are open or creating and sharing them outwards. So that's a potted answer. It's probably grossly unsatisfactory, but I don't have 2 hours. So.
And we're out of time, and exactly on time. And there's much more to discuss, of course. This was very short, so half an hour. What I did is I opened up a Google Docs with a few questions. So if you like to comment after this or get in contact, we are walking around, and maybe we can extend this discussion during the next one LIBER conferences to come. So one final remark by Vanessa?
And in the Google Doc, we'll also add the email. If you want to join the network to know more and learn from others, please do. We'll just add it in the Google Doc.
Thank you for your participation, and have a good conference. Thank you.